Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode.
Welcome back to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. Today, we are going to be talking to Carrie Swails. We have a two-part episode for you today. First, we're going to learn a little bit more about Carrie and her work in the disability advocacy area. And after that, we're going to be talking about her role at Quizizz and the platform's newest features and updates. But first, I think it's super important that we meet and learn a little bit more about Carrie. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So just to kick us off, can you share a little bit with us about your personal journey and what inspired you to really become a disability activist and advocate?
Well, I would say probably a similar journey to what I think we're seeing a lot of people go through on social media, especially right now or post-pandemic. Except for me, it happened a little bit earlier. I was pregnant in 2018 and got diagnosed with prepartum depression, which led to a diagnosis of autism. Surprise. And from there, it really became about unpacking all of those things, all of those reasons that you feel different, and then discovering kind of all of those co-occurring related experiences that layered on top of that. So learning I was autistic led me to what else do I need to know about myself that would make this make sense? And learning, okay, I also have ADHD. I have dyscalculia. That's why math was so hard for me in school. And really starting to unpack that and figure out how can I, especially as a teacher at the time, use my role to support those students really well. How can I use my role now as a new parent to make sure that my child, who was genetically highly likely to end up being autistic himself, how can I be the best parent and advocate for him so that his experience as a child, he feels included, cared for, and he knows how to advocate for himself and get what he needs. So it just got me started down that path.
And actually, I've had a lot of people surprisingly tell me that they got their diagnosis later on in their life. Some people are very early in my childhood. It's been a growing number of guests who are no, it was way later than that.
We're bound to have that happen. So much of the research on autism and neurodiversity in general is based off of one specific population. And so when that happens with that research, it means that the rest of us have a hard time not only accessing the care we need or the information, but it means that all of the diagnoses are built around that stereotype. So even if we go in and get a diagnosis, it can be really hard to obtain. And then battles with the medical system coverage, finding the right people. I feel lucky that I found out when I did.
There's a lot of hurdles to overcome for sure.
Yeah.
From various parts of life.
Yes.
But how do you think that those experiences specifically have impacted and really shaped the work that you've been doing with advocacy?
Learning so much about myself really helped me unpack what I needed to make my life feel better and more like me. So instead of constantly grieving over why I'm different, why is this so hard for me, why am I struggling with this, it became more what barrier can I remove that would just make this easy? How can I instead change this situation and make it work for me? And so it really led to just a lot of learning, reading, thinking about this, and realizing that of all these many different marginalized communities, we all face different but similar challenges. And for disability, it's such a unique community in that anyone can become part of the disabled community at any point in their life. It can happen to anyone. And so knowing that it's unique in that way, I often wondered why is no one out there really advocating for these people? And to me, it felt like a space where I could share a lot of things that I had learned. I started sharing a little bit on social media, but I'm not a big social media person. And what happened for me is transitioning out of the classroom and into the tech world, it just became a space where it was like, it was so different. And I was like, this is a space where I actually feel like I need accommodations. Like, I realized I was struggling to like understand the social workings of like corporate workplaces, and that I struggled to understand like people's motivations or what specific words mean, metaphors. And I started just asking really directly for help and disclosing very openly at work, like, hey, I'm autistic and I really don't understand what that metaphor means. I need more context. I need that explained to me. And I had an opportunity at that time to be part of like an employee resource group where I was able to offer to put together like a talk for the company on autism. And I was like, not quite sure how it was going to go, but I was like, we have a lot of other ERGs doing talks like this. I think I'm going to do this one myself because I think it might help me work. And it was really, really big and impactful. And that actually led me to what I do kind of on the side, is come into corporate workplaces, do DEI style talks around autism, neurodiversity, and specifically really focus on like, how can we better accommodate this population in the workplace? And what does that mean? And it's a great opportunity to call out how neurodiverse people in particular are so valuable in a tech company or any corporate setting, really.
Oh, yeah. I'm starting to hear little by little more companies are becoming more aware of that fact and really valuing neurodiversity in their employees and realizing the strong value that they do bring to their workforce. And I'm glad you mentioned all the DEI work that you are doing, because I was actually just about to ask you about that. You know, you do with organizations to help either with their DEI missions or initiatives, or just in general educating administrative staff, employees on disability or neurodiversity specifically.
Yeah, a lot of it is just like a workshop. So most people ask me to come in and just like deliver an hour-long talk. It's usually during like Autism Awareness Month or like October around like ADHD awareness. It could be in July. So we usually hit like these 3 times of the year. And I'm brought in, I'll do a 1-hour talk. I'll leave some resources behind. Love leaving a few like leave behind takeaways of like, how can you start doing this right now? And I don't want it ever to feel like an aspirational talk where it's like, we should be more accepting. It really should feel like, here's what you can do today, because you already have these employees in the workplace, whether you know or not. And here's how you can just like be more globally aware, accepting, and accommodating for them day to day. So it comes down to things like, can we just encourage people to like use captioning on all of their remote meetings and just have that turned on by default for the whole company, so that nobody needs to come in and like disclose during a work call, hey, can we turn on captioning? I really need it because of my auditory processing difficulties or something.
I love that. And a lot of my listeners have heard me say this before, but like I have my captioning on right now because I just can't focus without it. My mind wanders, and I need it there for me to have a better understanding. So yes, for that. And I appreciate the fact that you're doing the actionable steps too, because I mean, and I was coming at it, my presentations and stuff from a special ed teacher perspective. I always try to do the same thing of, you know, this is how we support students, not like, yay, they're in the same class as everybody else. So I like that you're taking these are the steps you should be doing, as opposed to an overall inspirational speech.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a little bit of both, but I think it's that former teacher of me. I'm like, we got to leave with like something you can do today.
I could see that. I'm the same way. What are the next steps? They need to know. They need to have the directions in advance.
Yeah. This is your must-do and may-do list.
What do you think are the most critical areas that organizations need to do to improve when it comes to disability and inclusivity? I think that's kind of a broad question. I know it's probably specific more toward different roles in different organizations, but just overall, what are kind of the most important areas they should be focusing on?
That's a really great question. I think it really depends on each company, but I think it always starts with like company culture. So we do have to do a little bit of like that aspirational talk to like get people excited about how easy this is and how important these employees are. Because if a company culture doesn't feel inclusive by default, it's really hard to then take action on like the things that we as a population really, really need at work. Outside of that, those quick steps, something like enabling captions, how can we get manager training to make sure that somebody knows what is the process for requesting accommodations? Because one of the things that I've found is that some companies have a great process set in place. They've really formalized things. They've made it incredibly clear to all employees, hey, if you need an accommodation, this is the form you fill out. This is how the process works. We have a third party come in. They evaluate. This is how long it takes. That makes it easy. But a lot of companies that are smaller and newer don't have that process in place. And when the process is really unclear, what happens then is you have employees going to their managers and saying, hey, I have this thing. They've disclosed their disability, which is so vulnerable and so hard to do. And then they're usually met with like pushback or sometimes questions that I don't think people intend to be ableist, but they do come off that way. And so the experiences are really, really poor for the employee. And they lose a lot of confidence. They end up not asking them or following through on what they need because they feel like the answer is going to be no. So I think like an easy, quick win is let's get a process in place and then like, let's post it somewhere public. Let's talk about it to our employees in our general Slack channel or whatever it is so that everybody knows where to find it and how it works. And that someone like me as an employee, I feel really confident. Like I know what I'm doing and I know what to expect. And I know that there's going to be other people involved, usually like outside of a manager, that can help make sure I'm going to get what I need.
I could see how that would be so frustrating. One, having to disclose to your manager or direct supervisor. That is very vulnerable. I love the idea of just a form. It's a very set process. It goes to the right person. It's something so easy for them to start up.
I recommend having like there are third-party consultants who can come in and help make sure that this is formalized. The entire process, even with like a formalized form, can still be really tough because for me, like I see value in both ways, but I also see hardships in both ways. Like I've experienced it myself where I filled out the form and it's taken like 8 weeks to get an accommodation that feels really reasonable that can start happening tomorrow. But I've also had the experience of I have a disability, and in that form process, I have to prove my disability, which requires me going to my doctor, bringing a bunch of paperwork. My doctor's going to charge me for this appointment. They're going to charge me for processing all of this extra paperwork, even though my doctor and I already know what my diagnoses are. And we know that these are all reasonable. And so then I have to pay out of my own pocket to prove that I'm disabled to my work. And then I have to wait 8 weeks. And that doesn't always feel right either. And so I always think, and I never know, this could be the wrong answer. It could be the right answer. Is there a way to make sure that once a company is like requested that proof, can they then reimburse that employee? So like the burden isn't on me to prove I'm disabled in order to get what I need, because I already have these big burdens. And that just feels like a really gross, icky experience as well.
Ooh, I didn't even think about the reimbursement process, but that is kind of, you're paying to get the accommodation that you need almost.
But I see it where, like, as an employer, it's also important for them to have the proof. And so, you know, I can see why it happens and why it's being set up that way. But as long as there's a way for us to like prioritize the employee in that scenario and make sure they feel as advocated for, included, that they're not taking on like extra burden by having to do this, whatever that looks like is probably the right way to do it. I mean, that would have made me feel, had I in that situation when somebody was like, yeah, and now we're going to reimburse you for what was your cost to prove this to us, I would have felt like $1 million. I would have been so surprised and taken back and felt so much like appreciation for that just being taken care of and feeling like, oh, wow, this is different, you know?
And a way to make your employee feel valued, like, which is the whole thing, right? Because so many people, you know, are commenting that they don't feel valued in their workplace. And that's just an easy way to be like, wow, look, my employer is treating me like a human being and appreciating me. Like, thanks.
Yeah.
So looking more long term, what are your hopes for, the future of disability rights and inclusivity? What are some changes that you're hoping to see in workplaces within the next 5-10 years? What are you thinking about the future?
I mean, I think about, and I know we're going to talk about this later too when talking about Quizizz, but how technology in general, not just our K-12 ed tech tools, but how do we make technology more accessible? Because to me, the idea of living in a world where we have more tech is supposed to make the world more accessible for people with disabilities. But often tech products don't prioritize accessibility when they're building a product because that isn't the majority of the population they serve. It's not important to them. There's probably not money behind it. People aren't on the market saying, oh my gosh, we can't wait to purchase this product because we really need an accessibility solution. So the tools that we use every day at work, especially remote work, how can we make sure that these tools are particularly accessible so that it would make it even easier for me where like, if I didn't even have to disclose and ask for an accommodation because it was built right in, that's the best kind of accommodation I could ask for.
And it would be so, it bothers me with the tech sometimes. And tech is a little bit different. I know we're going to talk about, all the great work that Quizizz is doing in a second, but, they seem to be a little bit more receptive to like, yes, let's accommodate for all learners. But getting out of that space, it does seem to be a little bit more like, well, do we need to? And it's like, well, you realize if you designed this so more people could use it, your original target audience is still going to be able to use it, right? Like, yeah, it's just opening it up a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd love to see that change in the next 5 to 10 years because I think that would just ease the burden so much for us asking for help all the time.
Oh, definitely. And we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and we will talk about your work with Quizizz. But thanks for talking to us about, your experiences and your journey first. And then we'll dive right in. All right. So welcome back, everyone. We are still here with Carrie Swails, and we're going to kind of switch hats now and talk about Carrie's role at Quizizz. So when I was a classroom teacher and I was teaching special ed, I used Quizizz all the time to engage my students, and assign formative assessments to determine their progress. And I know that since then, working with my teachers now, the platform has expanded so much and has really gone into this interactive lesson platform space. And I'm so excited to tackle the accessibility updates with you today. I caught your webinar the other day and I was like, yes, I need to reach out and talk about this right now because this is right up my alley. So the accommodations profiles, I need to start with that because that, when I first saw it, I was like, this is what I wanted in every platform I ever used. So can you tell us about that feature?
Yes. So let me summarize it a little bit. Basically, it's a way for teachers to give students what I would call a truly personalized experience. We can modify content. We can do all these different things for different student needs, but it's so different if I can take a platform like Quizizz where as a teacher, I'm going to be delivering my lessons, my practices, my assessments, anything that I can. And I can say, okay, I know I'm going to use like my old 3rd grade classroom here. I know I have a student with a brain injury. And so I know they need longer processing time. So I can go in and set these specific options up. I have 7 students who need text-to-speech accommodation. So I can go in and set that up. And what I can do is I can go through a list of a ton of different accommodations on Quizizz. I can assign them to specific students. I can basically make groups of students and say, these are my students that have these 2. These are my students who only have this one. Whatever it looks like, you can have as many groups as you need in this scenario. And then you can assign all of those accommodations. Then when you launch your assessment on Quizizz, whatever it looks like, your homework, your assignment, those accommodations are automatically built in for the student. And I think the best part to me as a teacher is that I can give my students one join code. They all join under the same code. Nobody knows that their experience might be different, that one student might only see 3 answer options instead of 5, that one student might have leveled down reading, that another student has text-to-speech enabled. And they're all getting these personalized experiences at the same time, removing and reducing these actual barriers that they have. And I don't know, it's just like, it's so touching because that's just what I always wanted. As a general classroom teacher, I wanted to make it so much easier for me to meet all these different needs. So it's a really cool, exciting update for us.
I was so excited when I saw it, I have to be honest. And I was coming from the tail end of a training with a teacher on another platform, and I won't say what platform, but it was the issue of, I have 25 students, these 2 need text to speech for this assessment, and these 3 need, extended time. And then we ended up with like 5 different codes for this assessment. And I was like, this is so frustrating. And then I hopped on the webinar and I was like, this is what I needed as a teacher. Even teaching in resource where all of my students had an IEP, their accommodations weren't the same. So I would, by default, just go in on most platforms and assign everything because then it caught all my students. But I love that this is so personalized to that individual learner, and it makes it so easy for the teacher.
I think because I was in a general classroom, I always felt like we get, our reading plans that tell us what students need text to speech. We get our IEPs, we got our 504 students. Then we've got our students who we just know maybe need a little extra love because maybe they're just a little bit behind. And trying to plan out, I teach a lesson, I have to teach my on-grade level material, and then I've got to differentiate. It's probably not going to happen every day because it's so difficult to do. And so I always felt like my top priority when differentiating for my students is those kids on IEPs and 504s because I have to comply with it. But the amount of teachers that I know were just not doing it because it was so hard to do. And this way, it feels like, your special education teachers, your intervention teachers, your general classroom teachers, they can suddenly collaborate together because whatever the student is experiencing in intervention, they're experiencing those same things now in the general classroom and making that time so much more meaningful.
That is, I think, the biggest pushback. I do consulting with like differentiation, designing for all learners typically. And that's the biggest pushback I get is not, well, I don't want to. It's the time. There's just no time. So this is so streamlined for the teachers. Anytime we can make something easier and still support students is a win. You mentioned a couple different accommodations, and I think there's over 25 that are in there right now or coming out. Can you touch on like a couple of those? I know you had text-to-speech, the leveling, but there were so many. I was so impressed. So what are some other accommodations that Quizizz offers?
Ooh, there are translate options. There's a bilingual dictionary that just came out. We just added a partnership with Desmos. So we've got their scientific and graphing calculators in there now. If you have a student who needs that for any reason, or you want to assign it to all of them, just because it makes life easy, go for it. Text to speech. I know we're working on speech to text by back to school. You can reduce answer options. I think coming out probably by the end of this month and then slowly rolling out over the course of the summer will be a way to actually level the content. Because I think assigning accommodations is one part of this, removing barriers to make the content accessible. But then what do you do for your students who actually need the content modified? So I have a 3rd grade student, but they're reading on a 1st grade level, but they actually are really great at math. And so I want to give them the same math problems, but I want to change the word problems and use vocabulary that's aligned with their 1st grade reading level. I will be able to do that by back to school. So there's a ton of different options in here. I wish I could remember all of them.
There's articles about it on the Quizizz blog that will link in the show notes for everybody so they could take a look at all of them. Even just I remember there were a couple that were like, hide leaderboard, I don't want to say removing distractions. The way it was visually presented, that I was looking at it and I was like, that would have helped so many of my students because that sensory, it's overwhelming. So I like that you have those options too, in addition to the more, traditional reading, writing, academic supports. You have those focusing ones as well.
Yeah, there'll be those, which I can use those. There's going to be one, I think we're going to be calling it reduce visual clutter that will remove some different things. There's also going to be a set of options that are almost, I would say, kind of thinking around themes, how can you change the contrast of things? So adapting the visual, adapting the sound, being able to turn that off. I think, eliminating that leaderboard for your students are going to be very distracted by like gamification. If you have some part of that in, I feel like there's going to basically be an option for everything. And the team that built this is very open to feedback. So if there are ideas out there, like, oh, I have a student who really needs this one thing and it feels like a really niche accessibility feature, tell us what it is, because our product team is amazing and they build amazing things. And I think they'd love to build it.
I'm sure people will come across things that I'm thinking back into my time in the classroom. There were always a couple of students that you're like, this is an accommodation that I don't normally deal with, but this would really help. So that's great that they're so receptive. I am so happy anytime an ed tech product is so engaged with the community and knowing the needs. That's great to hear.
One of the things I think I want to suggest myself, that I remember, I had one student who had Erlen syndrome, but it's where you can only read if you have a color overlay, because otherwise the words look all twisted, and different people with that might have different color overlays that actually work for them. And it's one of those things where it's like, I only ever came across it once as a teacher, but having something like that built right into a tool would be amazing.
That would be nice. Even like my students who are coming back from concussions, back on the device for like the first time, the overlay would be good for them too. I'm excited about the leveling too, because I agree that the accessibility features are amazing. Like that's one piece of it. But I did always have those students, that's why they were with me typically, was, we're in 6th grade, but we're reading on a 1st, 2nd grade level. And I want to really understand, do you know the skill or are you just not understanding the text? And I remember having to manually go in to like different platforms and rewrite the text to grade level. So the fact that you'll be able to just do that, I'm like so overwhelmed by it, because I'm like, now I need to go back to the classroom and teach again because this is magical. And that's going to be really exciting for teachers too, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement around that already from teachers. And I think about the same things that you said, like, how do I test my students' skill level on a specific topic when I know that, maybe they are on an IEP for certain things, but not others? And what if, solving that math problem by just like reducing the amount of text, simplifying it, could just mean that they could actually show me what they know and they felt so much more confident. I think that's huge. That's the best part about this.
And you mentioned in terms of privacy when it comes to students, you have the same join code, but the students have no recognition that their peers have something different, correct?
Yeah. The only way they'd know is if, you sat them in groups, they were looking at each other's screens, and then that might be like a specific scenario that hopefully the teacher can manage, but they have no idea that their peers have any of this going on. And for all they know, because you can shuffle through questions, maybe their friend is actually on a different question.
If a student wants to come out and say, like, this is my accommodation, that's fine. I had some students who were very open about what they were supposed to be entitled to receiving, and others who were like, please do not say that you're even here in this classroom for me right now. So I like that Quizizz is shielding, giving the opportunity for students to have that privacy.
I think it's important for their confidence, because honestly, one of the biggest blockers with providing accommodations in a classroom without tech, imagine what that looks like. For me, it was handing out all of these worksheets. My 7 students with, text to speech know that they need me to read it, because otherwise they can't do the work. But everybody's working independently. Other students are coming to me asking questions. Then some of those students are my earlier finishers. Those other kids don't even want to come to me and ask me to read, because that is so embarrassing. Even in 1st grade, in 3rd grade, you don't want to be that kid who is othered. And so they just won't. They'll just sit at their desk and they'll try and be quiet and hope that you don't notice them, and hope they can get away with just not doing anything. And they become so disengaged in that scenario. And I think this is such a great way to use tech, because now if nobody knows, they don't need to raise their hand and ask for anything. They can actually engage with the material and feel so much more confident. And that was part of why I started using tech as a teacher, is I wanted my students to access Immersive Reader. And it changed just Immersive Reader by itself, of having kids access Read Aloud was a game changer, because my students immediately felt more confident. Even if they knew they put their headphones on, even if they knew their peers knew, not having to bother asking anyone else just made them feel like, I can do this. I can power my way through this. And then when I go to my teacher and ask questions, it can be on the actual content and not the stuff I feel like I'm supposed to be good at, but I'm not.
Yes. That, educational journey resonates with me so much because that's actually how I got into tech too. It's frustrating to see your students not requesting the things that they need because, I wouldn't want to. I don't want to be, standing out from anybody. So I don't blame them, but the technology is such a great way for them to be empowered to get what they need in a more discreet way that works for them. So I love that Quizizz has that within the accommodations profile as well.
I think that's part of our mission at Quizizz in terms of we've always been like a student engagement platform, right? And so we've done a lot of gamification, mastery peak, fun stuff that makes kids excited to use the platform. But student engagement is so much more than that because you can't be engaged in class if you can't access the materials at a base level. And so this really feels like we're leveling up this idea. What does it mean for a student to be engaged?
I definitely can see that. And I appreciate the commitment to accessibility because a lot of platforms are like, yep, we have text to speech. But like the fact that these profiles are existing shows that you're really considering what this could mean for students. And I had to be honest, I already ran into classrooms and I was like, guess what? This platform doesn't do it, but Quizizz does. And it's just a great way to make things more accessible to all learners. And again, easy on the teachers to implement. So can you walk me through just very quickly the process that a teacher would go through if they wanted to create a Quizizz assignment, whether it's, homework or a live session, and creating those profiles for their students?
So key component of using accommodations is that you have to have a class set up on Quizizz. If you don't have a class, you can't actually assign an accommodation to a student because we want to make it so easy that it actually sticks. And you don't have to go in and set this up every time you launch something on the platform. You can set it up, at the beginning of the year when you have all your IEP meetings. You can adjust it mid-year, and you don't have to go in and change anything. So you have to set up a class. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can do that manually on your own. You can do that through Google Classroom. If you're on a school or district account on Quizizz, you can also bring in, Canvas, Schoology, and use those tools and pull in your classes that way. Once you've done that and you're ready to launch your first new assessment, homework, whatever it is that you're doing, then when you're in that process of publishing it, assigning it to your students, you'll be prompted after you select whatever mode. If you're going to do Mastery Peak, great. If you're going to do just instructor paced, student paced, anything like that, you're going to be prompted then to add an accommodation. And it'll pull up. You'll be able to select the class you want to add them to. You'll be able to go in, create your groups of students, name those groups, assign those accommodations, go back out. And then those are saved now for you. And you'll be able to publish, send it out to all of your students. So all they have to do at that point is log in. And I think for back to school, we're looking at making this even easier to edit, where eventually on the menu, you'll be able to find a spot where you can go in, make any changes to your classes and what accommodations are assigned anytime you need to. That way you don't have to go back in and open it up in that menu.
Oh, that's awesome that it saves too, because you don't have to do it every single time you're creating an assignment. You do it once, maybe you edit a couple times during the year as you gain students accommodations change because the IEP is changing or something. That's awesome that it sticks and you could implement it over and over and over again throughout the year. Then you can really just focus on the content at that point.
And it'll show up in your reports too. So let's say you are in an MTSS process with a student. They're not on an IEP yet, but we have some suspicions that they might need additional support. So we're just trying out and trying to document what accommodations have we tried with this student. This is a great way to be able to bring your data to those committee meetings on that student and say, here are all the things I've tried. I've run through, a number of different related accommodations right here on Quizizz, and it didn't change the performance of the student on that content. And that can help you move those things forward, because I know that's such a battle, especially for me as a general classroom teacher. That was so hard because we'd go through this process of like, okay, you need to try these bunches of different things and then document, are they working? And that documentation process can be incredibly time consuming as well. So now just being able to see in your reports, these students got these accommodations, just go download those, print those off, bring them to your MTSS committee. You're set to go.
I love that, because that piece is so challenging. And I'm in New Jersey, and a lot of districts are heading the MTSS route. Having that access to that data, I'm thinking about even my students with IEPs, showing and proving that those accommodations are still working for those students. Like, can we pull this text to speech? Do they really need it? Like, oh yes, look at the performance when they had access to it and look at the performance when they did not have. Like, just those very clear data points, and not me having to go back and remember, like, go through my notes and say, when did I assign this accommodation to the student? Did they use it? It really makes everything so much easier to have all that data at your fingertips.
Or what about those scenarios where somebody says, and we hope this is never the case, right? A parent is like, I don't know that you're giving my child their reduced answer option choices. They said they didn't get them in class, and you never know what the story is once a student goes home. If I were to say like, oh, well, I deliver all of our tests, our assignments on Quizizz, and I can show you in these reports, your student got it every single time.
Oh yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, confidence booster for the parent. Make sure that everybody's on the same page. You're able to just prove that you're always doing exactly what the IEP outlined.
And it happens, students, it was always my students forgot. Obviously, you're a parent, you should be concerned if you hear your child's not getting what they need. But it's nice to have that reassurance that, like, oh no, look, this is their accommodation profile. Look, they have text to speech, they have translation, they have this, they have that, they have the graphing calculator. Like, it's all right there.
Yeah, it would be something I would worry about as a parent, because I know that the stories my child tells me are not always aligned to what's happening. And so I know I want to ask those questions, and I just want to know, are we for sure doing everything we need? Is he just telling me stories because it's fun? He's 5, so you never know.
Speaking of reporting, let's talk about the reporting. I know that there is, you were talking about it in the webinar, the AI Analyze feature within those reports, where you can pinpoint how to better individualize support for your students, which I was also very excited about, because like I always used to have these pathways in my mind, like when they get this score, or if they didn't do as well in this area, I'm giving them this. If they did well, I'm giving them this. Can you talk about that feature within Quizizz?
That's a little bit outside of the accommodation profile. Basically, what's happening is if you're on a school or district plan, you can access this AI Analyze tool. So anytime you complete a quiz, a homework assignment on the platform, you can go through into your reports and actually analyze those results. And that's something that takes a lot of time for teachers. So, when I was doing only like worksheets, paperwork type stuff, the reality is my 3rd graders are putting it in a pile in a box on my desk, and I'm lucky to get to it ever to really confirm what they know. But when I move to a digital platform, maybe I can view those reports, maybe get to it a little bit quicker. But this actually can just go through the report for me and say, okay, you taught multiplication today and showed students how to do it in the equal groups strategy. And, only 70% of your students actually were proficient at it. 30% weren't. Let's give that 30% some extra practice. And so then it can pull those 30% of your students out and say, okay, here's the students who need this extra practice. And it can go through the existing Quizizz library and say, here's some options. You can assign them for extra practice right now, and just automate that. Because to me, I want to be able to look at the data by going through it and analyzing it, and trying to pick out those trends can be really, really difficult.
That's a lot of effort. My day-to-day was looking at that data and determining where to go next for each student. So having even just a general overview to say, like, these are your students struggling with central idea. Cool. Now I can assign independent practice or pull a small group of those students and, have them work on it while I'm doing more independent work with other students. Like, I just appreciate how much thought went into streamlining this process so students are supported and teachers aren't overwhelmed by the process at the same time.
I mean, in that ELA scenario too, that's where, AI Analyze could pull different things at the same time. It'll be able to look through student answers and be like, you know what, not only did they not understand main idea, but they also didn't understand the details component. These 5 students didn't understand main idea. These 2 didn't understand details. And these other 3 maybe didn't understand something else that's summarizing. So you could get everybody covered all in one go.
I needed this so badly when I taught. I can't get over it because I needed it so badly. I would have saved so much manual time of having to do all these creations myself. And I'm sure other teachers feel the same way. I know there was beta testing on the accommodations profiles, right? What was some of the feedback that you got from the teachers and the students who participated?
So our feedback primarily comes from teachers, and they're passing on a lot of student feedback. I think for the students, many of them didn't even know that this is happening, because it's such an included automatic experience. But teachers were telling us, like, here's the accommodations that we actually need. These are the ones that are the most important to us. Our team is grabbing all of that feedback, taking it and building those things according to how our teachers actually saying that they want to see this. We got feedback that, we need a better, more global place to be able to find accommodations that's not in the process of launching a quiz. And that's part of why the team is trying to build that out so that there's an easier place where you can just access it at any time. So I would say almost anything that teachers have suggested has been something that has been considered, because we're excited. We're just one of the only tools in our space that has something like this. So if there's a specific way that teachers want to see this, we're like, yeah, I bet we could probably figure that out. We've had feedback about what modes teachers want to see this in, and we're taking all of that and doing it. We've had feedback about other accommodations that we could maybe add. We've had feedback about how the accommodations we do have work and adapting those. So we've gotten feedback on our read aloud and how sometimes, depending on how the characters are input, it reads those things a little bit awkwardly. So one of the things we're doing for back to school is fixing a read aloud and kind of creating like a V2 that's going to be a lot smoother and easier for a student to understand.
Oh, that's great. And I know the text to speech is so challenging to get right. And I always joke in my presentations that I used to have 10 text to speech extension options because some students were like, I love this one. This one's great. And the others were like, this voice is the worst voice I've ever heard, and I can't pay attention. So that one is so hard to get right. So I appreciate that you took that feedback and the team kind of is working on making a different version for back to school, because that's so tricky to get right.
It is. And it's really hard to, I remember one of the very first Chrome extensions that I used for text to speech, the students had to highlight the text that they wanted to read. But if you have a student who maybe doesn't have fine motor skills that are quite as rounded out, they struggle to even just highlight it on the screen to get what they need. So making sure that all those little itty bitty things are built into the experience is really actually important to the success of the student.
I remember those extensions well, by the way. I remember
yes,
the struggle with highlighting with the trackpad on a Chromebook. That was some bad times.
I feel like I can't do it, and I have years of experience highlighting with a trackpad.
I struggle sometimes. I know I've said it before, but I do really appreciate how much work went into this creation. And I'm so impressed by what the end result is, because it's just really something that I wanted so badly. And I know other teachers did too. I'm just so happy it exists.
As somebody who uses accommodations like this, this is one of those moments where I feel like my story comes full circle, because I've always wanted to work for a K-12 tech company where it's we're actually putting out something that would make a difference to me as a student, or make a difference to the students that I taught, where I know exactly how this could be life-changing for someone. And so for me, being able to be a part of launching this and running the marketing behind it has been something I'm super proud of, because it just feels like we're not just doing work, like we're building something that's really, really important, that means a lot to so many people. And even if it might be hard to track how much it means with students, we know it's actually making a huge difference in the quality of their education every single day.
It's really taking the technology and using it for more than just engagement, fun content in the classroom. It's making instruction more meaningful and impactful. So I'm really excited about it. And I want to thank you so much, Carrie, for being here with us today. And, both parts, talking to us about you and your experience, and then talking about all the work you're doing at Quizizz and all the things being done there for accommodations purposes. I'm so excited, and I know a lot of other people are too, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to just be here and talk about something that is so full circle and so fun to see come to life.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.